The propane today.
Is that so?
They're bringing out his propane and hooking it up today.
That's Goldie Edith Murphy, and it was Goldie Edith Denny when I was a girl.
D-E-N-N?
E-Y.
Ma'am, where were you born?
I was born 10 miles south of El Reno on a claim.
When's your birthday?
It's in July, the 10th of July.
In what year?
And how old am I? Well,
Yeah.
I'm 88 years old. I was
88.
born in 1895.
1890.
Who was your father?
Huh?
Who was your father?
My father was Elwood Denny.
And who was your mother?
Millie Denny.
What was her maiden name?
Her maiden name was Sloniker.
What kind of work did your father do?
What did my father do? He farmed.
Farmer. Okay. Now, did he homestead the claim?
Yes, they both homesteaded. And she was a girl when they homesteaded. And then they married. And I was born on the homestead, and I lived there till I was 6 years old. Went to 1 year to school. And my father gave the land for to have a school. And it's Banner School.
Now, was this
It was
the...
Banner School at that time, and it still is. They still got Banner. I don't know whether it's a school or not, but anyhow, this land is still in our name, you know.
Was that the run of 89 that your father made?
I think so. I think
Okay.
it was 89, yeah.
Did he talk about making the run?
About making the run.
Yeah.
Yes, they made the run. They came from Highway, here, Winterset Highway. And they come here when Oklahoma City was a tent town. And they had to buy the water they drank, and it caused them to have diarrhea, and there was just a terrible way, you know. And they first went to the Panhandle to take land because the Indians had this, see, and they heard that there was going to be an opening at Fort Reno, and so they hurried and come back, and they had to live on horses' corn coming back. The parts that need it, you know. They didn't have no food, only just what they could kill, you know. And they was hard to get back, and they got back, and they come to Fort Reno and put up their tent. And the Indians was, you know, ready to break out. They didn't want to be in you know, housed in.
Yeah.
And of course, it was after the war and all, and they had, so they told my folks, they said, now don't say a word if the Indians come in your tent and eat what you got or sit on your bed or anything. And they come in on our tent, and their head was just a crawling with lice, you know, lice. And of course that just killed Mama to think of see them lice in the head and what she'd have to do afterwards. You had to boil everything that the lice was on, because they laid nits, and then they had new batch out. And well, then they turned them loose to take the land. And at that time, Mom was single, and she took a quarter, and her father took whatever they allowed. Well, I don't know whether it's 160 acres, whatever they allowed.
Yeah.
And my father took a quarter of land, and but my grandmother, she didn't take. My grandfather did, but my grandmother didn't. So they they lived on that land. I was 6 years old and moved off. My dad was one of these kind that wouldn't stay nowheres, and he could do anything. You know, he could run an engine. He could run a sawmill. He could run anything. He was just that type. But he always wanted to be on the move. So he sold the land and went up into the hills, 16 miles west of El Reno. And they first went to Arkansas. He sold his claim and went to Arkansas. Well, you know, they couldn't farm nothing. Arkansas was just rock and everything else, and they never was used to that. They had the best quarter of land below El Reno, black lands, you know, land. I went years later. I went by there, and there was corn ears hanging about this long on the corn, you know. And I just thought, why in the dickens didn't they keep that land? But they didn't. And so Mama, she kept hers, and she worked at they built, you know, they started to build El Reno, you know, build up places for people to buy stuff.
Right.
And they built a dry goods store there, and she worked. She took the claim, and you know, they had to put a house on the claim. And so she worked in a store. She only had a 3rd grade education, but she worked in the store, clerked in the store to have money enough to build her a cabin on her land, see?
What was the name of the store?
Huh?
What was the name of the store she worked in?
Well, I just don't know. I've got an old album. I got a picture of the woman that her and her husband built that store, but I don't know what the name was. Let me see. Well, I don't know what it was first. I don't know what it was, but it finally turned out to be Freiberger's store in El Reno. But I don't know what the first name was. You know, these people built it and hired Mama to work in the store. And then she got enough ahead to build her little cabin. And of course, then she went to live on it. They had to live on it, you know. If they didn't, they took it away from her. But the funny part of it was, they went to each one went to take their land, and Dad took them all in the wagon, you know, took them out there and put them on each one on. He'd went ahead of the horse and he'd picked out the good land. And when it comes time to take it, why then he had it all picked out where they used to stop. So it was staked, you know, and they wasn't supposed to stake it, but he did. So he dumped Mama out there with a gun.
Was he a Sooner?
Huh?
Was he a Sooner?
Was he a what?
A Sooner?
A Sooner?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. We come here in early days. Well, that's called a Sooner or not.
Well, that's the one. Those are the ones that snuck across the line before the opening.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know. Anyhow, he went. Anyhow, I don't know now. I mean, they might have staked the claim later, but anyhow, it was staked, and Mama, they piled her out with some bedding on where she was to be. They had to. You see, they had to be after they was all there. Then they had to be checked, you know, to see who owned the land or who got it, don't you know? And so Mama went to sleep. Here she had her gun and she went to sleep. And our neighbor, finally our neighbor, he come along and he said, "Lady, you better wake up. Somebody will steal your land. They'll change the stakes, and here you will be asleep on them." So that's the way it went. So they went through the years just like, and then Dad, he couldn't stay no place. So he sold the land and went to Arkansas. Well, he wouldn't stay there, so he come back from there. And my grandfather, on his side, he stayed on the claim, see. And my grandfather on mother's side stayed on the claim. And nothing to do with him, but he wanted to go here and he wanted to go there. And Mom wouldn't go. She said, "You can go if you want to, but I'm going to stay on my claim." And so finally then he wanted to go up in the hills. We called it the hills, 16 miles west of El Reno. It's, you know, there's canyons and hills and everything. What he wanted of that land, I don't know, but he did. And that's where I grew up, you know, in that place.
Did your father talk about making the run? Did he make it on horseback?
Yeah, he made it on horseback, and the old white horse that he made the run with died on the reservation.
Mm-hmm. Did he talk about the people lining up?
Yes, they all lined up. They was all in their tents and all ready to go. Then when they give the word go, they just went, just with buggies and wagons and everything else, you know, to take land. All of them wanted the best land, you know. And he'd been and looked at the land, so he knew where to go to get it. He didn't stake it. He just went to tell them where to go, so they could take it. And
What about your mother? How did she make the run?
she came with my grandparents. Her and her father came with my grandparents on Dad's side to make the run. See, she come with them, and Dad come ahead. See, and
Did your mother also, you said your mother staked a claim also?
did she what?
Did your mother stake a claim also?
She took a claim. That was when she was a girl. See.
Yeah.
And
Well, did she make the run then?
yes, she made the run. They made the run to take the claim. See, they had to stay in tents at Darlington up there, or Fort Reno. You know, that's where the Indians was, and that's where the law was. You know, and
Did she make it on horseback?
yeah, she made it. They all took their claims, just in anything they had. You know, and her father took a claim and she took a claim, but my grandmother didn't. So in later years, then Dad was bound to move up in the hills, and my grandmother took school land, and they had 40 years to pay for the school land, and so she took that, and you know, they paid down so much, and then they had the 40 years to pay it. Mama finished paying for the school land in later years, after Dad died and all. And my dad then, he put in a grist mill, and he first got a thrashing machine, and he thrashed all over the country, you know, with a thrashing machine, not a combine or nothing like that, a thrashing machine. And he went clear down to Pocasset to thrash, and clear up by Geary and thrashed. And Mama went along and cooked for the men, and my grandparents stayed at home with us kids. And finally, she didn't go first. They hired somebody to cook, and they never could get nobody that could cook, so the men would stay. And you know, them men worked for that thrashing machine at 50 cents a day with their horses and wagons, hauling bundles to the thrashing machine.
How many men worked the thrashing machine?
Oh, there was about 20, I think, that worked.
Did you ever cook for them?
I didn't cook for them, but
Yeah.
took care of the kids, you know. And Mama run. They always had a big tent, and I took care of the little fellas, you know.
How many men were in the whole harvest crew?
whole crew.
Yeah, you had the thrashing.
I'm not sure about how many, but there must have been about 20.
Okay. How many different machines did it take to harvest the wheat?
Well, you see, they had to have the hay rack in their teams, and they hauled in the bundles. The people bundled their wheat, and then they took pitchforks and fed the machine, see, and that's where they got their wheat. And some places they didn't raise wheat, they raised something else. But where he thrashed, they raised wheat, and they couldn't get nobody to thrash their wheat, see. This was nobody to thrash his wheat. So he got a steam engine and a thrashing machine and went and thrashed wheat. Well, they offered him $10 a day to come to Fort Reno and run the engines, you know. They run engines there, steam engines. But he wouldn't do it. No, he wouldn't do it. He wasn't going to work for anybody. He was going to work for himself. And we just begged him to go because money you could see when them men were 50 cents a day and fed their horses and hauled them bundles from early morning till light. They got up with the daylight and went, you know, haul those bundles on the machine. It was, and I was just a kid, you know.
Did your parents ever talk about going to the Panhandle first, of why they went there?
Yes, they went to the Panhandle to take land, but they heard there was land going to be open, took away from the Indians and open. You know what the reservation is now, that's where the Indians was put. And so they come here because the land's better here than it is out there.
So they didn't take a claim in the Panhandle?
No,
then?
they didn't take a claim.
Okay.
They went and they didn't like it very well, and through somebody, they heard they was going to open up the reservation around El Reno, and that's what they done. See, well, they come back and they had to park their tents till the officers and the ones that was doing that got the Indians settled down to where they could. Then they told them they could all go and take their claims, and they all had a chance at everything. The fella, I guess, that had the fastest horse got there first. And so I just know that my dad, old Fred died on us, and he was old, you know, and he made the run, and he got that good land. Ooh, that was good land, black, you know, black land. Dad just was awful. He never would stay with nothing. But he was always doing something else, you know. He run a blacksmith shop and sharpened their plows and sharpened their stuff and fixed them. And he run a grist mill and ground corn for people who had to live on corn bread, you know. And he ground, well, in fact, the matter, he ground wheat and he ground anything. But you know, it wasn't white. It wasn't bleached or nothing.
Yeah.
But it would make bread. And Mama used to make rye bread. And she just despised to make rye bread. But she made it, and she made it good. It was good.
Did your father talk about the army that was there before the
No,
opening?
he never talked about that.
Yeah, okay.
No, he never talked about it.
When you were a little girl, what chores did you do around the farm?
What did it do?
Yeah, what chores?
Well, I cooked, done the cooking. My mother always worked out. She run the steam engine for Dad, and I cooked. I cooked ever since I was 10 years old, and we made bread every other day, 10 loaves of bread, and we eat it up. They bought their meat, the flour by the big 50 pounds sack, you know. And she made butter to sell, to buy beans, and we raised potatoes. We raised lots of stuff, but there's lots of stuff we couldn't raise, see. And they bought beans, they bought sugar, and they bought flour, you know, things like that. And she made this butter and molded it all in nice squares, you know. And her butter sold like fury, you know, when it come in, because it was nice. She'd keep a wet cloth over it. It took 3 hours to go to town. It was 16 miles from town, and it took 3 hours to go there in a spring wagon.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a good team of horses, you know. And just think about that. I think about it now, and they didn't have no telephones, and if you got anything or went any place, you had to go horseback, you know, or in a buggy. And they used to put me on a horse and send me for the doctor. Well, I'd get on the horse and away I'd go get the doctor. He was about 4 miles away. And one time my sister had, they always called the flu the grip. You know, that's what they called it in olden times. And she coughed for 2 days and 2 nights, and she didn't stop coughing. She just coughed. And they said, Goldie, you got to get on a horse and go get the doctor, see if you can. Well, I got on the horse and I went, and he said, Goldie, you go home and you take a 3-grain quinine capsule and you fill it with red pepper and you give it to her. I done it. Stopped her cough. Didn't have no more cough. Just think about red pepper.
Mm-hmm.
We had to do with just anything. We just had to do quinine and calomel and stuff like that was all the medicine had. And what the doctor had, he'd come to our house horseback or in a buggy, and he'd make his medicine on our table. He'd make it in little packages, you know, fold up like cigarette, you know, and he'd fold it, you know. And he'd come, and I'd be in the kitchen cooking or something, and he'd say, Goldie, give me the soda box. And I'd give him the soda box. Well, he put soda in every bit of medicine that he made, and now they think they can't take soda. You know, they think it's awful to take soda. And he put soda in every bit of medicine. I could have learned, but I was just a kid, you know, I was just young, 10 years old or something like that. And I could ask him, he would have told me, I know he would. But he, you know, sir, he never hardly ever lost a case when they'd be sick with typhoid fever or pneumonia or anything like that. Why, he always saved his. He came from the northern states, you know, to Oklahoma in the early time, and he just lived on the farm. See, he homesteaded too, and he had 8 kids, and them was the meanest kids. They never would do nothing for him. I felt sorry. You know, this Wilbur, I don't know what his name, Stone that comes on, used to come on the television, or I know you do. He was in, I think he was in, that there wagon train picture.
Okay.
That doctor was just like him. He just looked exactly and talked exactly like old Dr. Powell.
Milburn Stone. Milburn Stone. Is that his name?
He's what?
Milburn Stone? Is that his name? He played the doctor
Oh,
on...
I believe it was, but
Yeah.
that man was. But he was just exactly like a early-time doctor. He talked like it, he acted like it, just exactly. You see, I always had to go to the doctor. My brother cut his arm. No, he broke it. And when he broke it, he cut it, of course. So I had to take him over to the doctor. They always said to me to do everything. And we had a one-horse buggy, you know, and I took him over there when the doctor said, well, Goldie, he said, go across over there to Dan Murphy's and get me a needle. I've got to sew his arm up. I went across and I told Mrs. Murphy that the doctor wanted a needle that he had to sew up Evelyn's arm. And she just gave him the rustiest needle that she could find. She said, he's always sending over here for something. But she gave me the needle. So I went back, and he said, that's the way she does me, he says. Sends that old rusty needle. Well, he took that needle and he put it, we had a wooden floor, you know, and he put it on the floor and he took his foot and he rubbed that needle till he rubbed every bit of rust off of it. And then he put it in alcohol, sewed up my brother's arm, and he got well.
Mm-hmm.
I think of them days.
Can you think of any other home remedies that your mother used? Any medicines
Well,
that she...
they used poultices, mustard poultice, mustard, you know.
How do you make a mustard poultice?
Well, you have to stir up water and dough and flour and make it just like a paste or like a dough, you know. Not really like a dough, it'll paste. And then you paste that on rag, and then you take raw mustard and you sprinkle over it, all over it like that. And then you put another rag on top of it. We always kept old sheets or old things like that, you know. And then you heat that on the stove. See, we had a wood stove, you know, and you could just lay that down on that stove and get it hot, see. And then take it and put on, and you could put it on there and it'd sometimes blister, but it'd cure what ailed you. I put a minimum on.
What kind of cough medicine would you use?
Huh?
What kind of cough medicine did you have?
Well, we didn't really have any cough medicine that I know of, unless we could buy some. We didn't have any cough medicine. The doctor didn't give us any cough medicine, so we didn't have really any cough medicine. Like I said, my sister coughed, you know, so she took that till we give her that red pepper.
Yeah.
And we really didn't have, until they finally got a little cough medicine stuff in the stores in town, we didn't have. She used poultices so much, you know, for everything. Everything, fry onions, and put them on the neck if they got throat trouble like diphtheria or something like that, you know. And
Ever wear a nasopharynx bag?
I eat mine up. You know, it seemed like there was always some kind of a disease in the country. Well, Mama, she put when I was a baby, why, I had the colic. I had the colic and cried when we was down in Arkansas. And then I squalled and bawled, and there was an old colored lady come up, and she said, Mrs. Demi, if you'll give that baby what I tell you to, she said, it won't cry with a colic. And Ray tells me that's why I have to have a little whiskey along with it. So she says, you get some asafoetida. They had drugstores then, they sold it. And she said, you get some asafoetida and you get you a bottle and you pour whiskey over that acidity and you stir that, she said. And you give that baby 3 drops of that on sugar. You know, you drop it on sugar and give it to me. And that's what they gave me for the colic. And they quit the colic and so then Mama, she gave acidity to on these bags around her neck. Well, I just chew them out and eat it up, you know. The other kids didn't, and they'd get all the diseases. I never took no diseases, but
What?
they took them all.
What is acidity made of?
Huh?
What is acidity made of? What's in it?
I really don't know, but I asked, we had a druggist out there by our name, Denny. His name was Denny, you know. And I went in there one day and I said, I don't know what acidity is good for. He says it's good for your nerves. That's what he told me.
Yeah.
I didn't know what was good for.
Yeah.
He says good for your nerves.
Mm-hmm.
And so I never mind that aspect. It's nasty as the dickens. I tell you, it ain't good tasting, but I don't mind it a bit.
Smells of high heaven, I understand.
Yeah, as I said, I had it when I was little, so it's added up the years.
Did you do the laundry?
Huh?
Did you do the laundry?
Did I do the laundry?
Yeah.
Stayed home from school every week and washed all day on the board.
How did you do the laundry?
We had a tub of water and washed on the board. Then we'd wrench them, hang them on the line. It took us all day to do washing, you know.
Did you do it outside?
Me and my mother.
Did you do it outside or inside?
Yeah, well, we had a porch on our house, and we done it out on the porch. And of course, it was warm, you know. And we done it in the house when it was cold.
Yeah.
But, you know, summertime, we done it on the
How
porch.
big of a fire would you have to make to heat the water?
We had an old stove in the where Dad fixed us what we called a well house. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The water run in there and run out to the hogs, and we kept our milk in there. You know, in early day you didn't have no way of. You just had to skim your milk, you know, and that'd bring the cream to the top. We'd skim it, and make butter with it, you know. And later on they got separators, see. But they didn't have them. They didn't have no telephones. They didn't have no rural delivery. No, it was a man run a little store, not too far from us, I guess about 4 miles or 5. And he'd go to town about every other day and get the mail. And oh Lord, we had to go every day and pick the worms off the tobacco leaf. And when they got spotted, you know, brown spotted all over the leaves, then she'd pick them and fold them and lay them in a box. And when they got right, when it come a damp day or something, then she'd take the stems out of the leaves, you know, and roll them up into a twist. And Dad would chew that tobacco, and she would smoke it. She had a clay pipe.
What kind of maintenance did your father do on his wagon?
What?
What kind of maintenance did your father do on the wagon?
You mean?
Like greasing the axles or?
Yes. Well, they had axle grease.
Yeah.
Axle grease, and they just pull them out a little bit and put the grease on, push them back.
How often did he have to do that?
He'd heat the rims. He'd heat them, you know, hot. He had a forge, as they call it, and redo the inside, you know, the where it goes on. You know, they'd get loose. They'd get loose after a while and come on. And he could do that.
He had to shrink it?
Yeah, shrink it, see? And then he'd hammer it on. And he done that, you know, for the neighbors and for all around. They paid him for doing it, of course, but then they didn't have, it was 16 miles to El Reno and maybe you could get somebody and maybe you couldn't, see.
What kind of wagon did you have?
Well, they have the old-fashioned Sooner wagons, you know, with the canvas.
Yeah, the wagon
over
sheet.
'em. Yeah, wagon sheet turned over 'em.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you remember Statehood Day?
Yeah, I do.
Tell me about that day.
Well, I can't tell you a lot about it, but they made a big to-do about it, you know, when they had statehood. I don't know a lot about it. I just know that Dad was all excited about statehood, and I suppose they had a big rally.
Where did you live then?
We still lived out there 16 miles west of El Reno. I lived there till I married. My dad took a trip to Oregon. He wanted to go to Oregon. He went to Oregon, and Mama told him he could go if he wanted to, but she wasn't going no place else. And he went to Oregon, and rained all the time he was out there. And he went out there to kill a bear. Well, he couldn't find no bear. And the lady where he stayed, she said, "Mr. Denny, if you'll go out just before it breaks day and look in my garden." Her garden was, you know, they took poles and made a place around to keep stuff out, you know. She said, "You'll get a bear. It'll be in there eating my cabbage." And sure enough, he got a bear. And he was thrilled to death to get that bear, you know.
Yeah.
But he wasn't satisfied there either. He
Yeah.
come back, then they had trains, you know, and he went.
Did they have a big celebration on Statehood Day?
Yeah, they had a big celebration in El Reno.
Did you go to it?
No, I didn't. I was just a kid, you know.
Mhm.
And he went, my dad went, and my mom didn't go, but he went.
What did he say about it? What was the celebration like?
Well, he didn't say a whole lot that I heard him say. He just talked about statehood and all that kind of stuff. And of course, I was a kid. I didn't pay any attention to it, you know.
Did they talk about all the saloons closing up?
Yes, they talked about saloons opening up, and they did open up.
Mm-hmm.
You could buy whiskey over the counter. They had a ladies' room where you could drink beer, go in and take lunch and beer, and
A ladies' room.
a ladies' room. Anybody like Mom and Dad, they could go in this room, and they serve brown bread, and that was the best darn bread, and beer. You know, that's what. Of course, they paid for it, but then that's what it was,
Could women go in the saloons?
huh?
Could women go in the
It was
saloons?
not really in the saloon. This was it would belong to the saloon, but it was at the side, see. No, they didn't know women, only just the sorry ones go in the saloon, you know. They had the sorry ones.
What were the sorry women?
Well, they was a bad kind. They run a house there in town, you know.
Ran a house.
You know, I guess, I hate to say it, but it was a whorehouse.
Well, I won't ask you about that. Let me see. Did your father ever talk about the Great Depression of 1907?
Well, yes, he talked some of it.
What caused that depression?
I don't know. I don't know what it was, because I was too little to know. But I know that we had a depression.
Yeah.
We didn't have money for nothing, and it was awful.
I am going to ask you a question. Who ran that house?
Huh?
You know the house you mentioned?
Yeah,
The whorehouse?
yeah.
Who ran that?
Well, there was a woman run it. She run it.
What was her name?
I couldn't tell you that. I didn't know that. I didn't know much about them kind of houses. They kept me away from this stuff.
Where was it located?
Huh?
Where was it located?
Well, we went into El Reno, and as we went into town, it was in the nigger part of town. You know where the nigger school is in El Reno?
No, ma'am.
You don't? Well,
Is
it ain't a nigger school now, but it was a nigger school. You know, they educated the niggers there, but they used it when I left El Reno for to keep stuff for the poor. You know, like clothes and stuff like that, like the welfare. Well, just before you get to that building, coming up the hill, there was a big square house. It was big, and it was wood, you know, but it was a big house. And that was considered that house.
Is it still there?
I don't know. I haven't been there.
Yeah.
I haven't been there for quite a while.
What part of
I
town?
lived 20 years in
Yeah.
El Reno, but I never was in that part of town.
What part of town is that school in?
Well, it was in the west part of town,
West
kind
part
of
of
down on the nigger section, you
Yeah.
know. I've seen a lot of them women in the stores buying stuff, you know, 'cause they had money, 'cause everybody paid them for what they done.
How did they dress?
Huh?
How did they dress?
Oh, they dressed stylish. They dressed stylish up in the stores. You'd see them in the stores. You could always tell them, 'cause we didn't have money to dress like they did, you know.
So they had the latest fashions.
Yeah, the latest fashion. That's what they had.
They wear lots of makeup?
Huh?
They wear lots of makeup?
Yeah, lots of wake up. Fix their hair all up pretty, you know.
How many girls were there?
I don't really know. I don't know how many there was. I just, Dad, you know, told me that was what it was. and he said, they're just sorry women. He never did, you know, explain anything about it. Like, I got older and know better, you know.
Yeah. What kind of men went to those houses?
Huh?
What kind of men went to those houses?
What kind of men went
Yeah.
there? I reckon a lot of them went there. I don't know. And I suppose the single man, I don't know. I didn't go, so I don't know.
Well, I won't ask you any more about that.
You know, they followed the new towns and stashed themselves in a building like that, you know. You read it in books. It's just like that. That's the way they do. They only live about 5 years, but they're busy while they do.
You raised cattle, didn't you?
Yes, we'd raise cattle.
If you had a cow that was snake bit, what would you do?
Huh?
If a cow got snake bit, what would you do?
Well, I doctored them. I cured three snake bit.
What'd you do?
I had homemade soap. I used to make homemade soap. I melted the homemade soap till it got in syrup. I stirred sweet cream in that till it just what I had to put, you know. Then I stirred bran in that.
Stirred what?
Stirred bran in that.
Okay.
Bran. You have to have a bulk, you
Yeah.
know.
Right.
And we used to buy those 50-pound sacks of flour, you know, and I'd take one of them sacks and I'd put it in. I'd go down. I went down, my husband said one day, he said, Goldie, there's a calf down there in the barn. He said, I think it'll be dead by night, but I wish you'd go down and give it some water. And I went down there, and there the calf's eyes are sticking clear out of its head like this. And it was just laying there, and its neck was all swelled up. And I went down there, and I put that soap all over its face and all over its neck, up and down its back. And then I put the rest of it in that sack and laid it on his, kind of on his shoulder and back. I didn't know where the calf was bit, was a snake pot, see? But I put it clear up his back. And I said to my son-in-law, I said, Deibert, when you come in, he was out hunting. And I said, when you come in from hunting, you go down there and see if you can give that calf some water. I said, I couldn't get no water down it. It's just like it was dead. But I put that on so that it'd be easy. I thought, well, the poor thing, maybe it'll die easy. And so I went back to the house, and I wanted to go to my neighbor ladies, and I went there, and then I come home to cook supper. And I didn't think any more about the calf. I thought it'd die. I didn't think it'd live. And just come in about 10 o'clock, he took a bunch of cattle to the market. He always brought them to Oklahoma City to the market. And he said, Goldie, what did you do with that calf? He said, what did you do to that calf? I said, I doctored it. Well, he said, how did you doctor it? I told him how I doctored it. Well, he says, do you know that calf's eaten? He says, it's eaten that way. I said, oh, that calf couldn't be eaten. It is, he said. So my husband, if he doctored the cow, he got their disease. That all fell to me to doctor the cattle. And so then we had 2 milk cows. They were Jerseys, you know, that we milked. And he was a stock man. He didn't fool with only just with the milk cows we milked. I mean, he run. We had grass pasture, and he run cattle. See, and so he comes to the house and he said, Goldie, our old milk cow's laying down out there. I guess she's been bit by a moccasin. You know, there was the moccasin snakes. Mm-hmm. And he said they had bit her on the udder. And I said, well, I'll get this dope fixed and I'll go doctor. I don't know if it'll do any good or not, but I'll go doctor. And I did. I went down there with my soap and cream and brand. We couldn't afford to use flour. We had to use something that's bulky. So we used brand. You know, we fed the milk cows brand. And you had to have something that you could hold on there.
Could you use flour?
Stay. That would stay, see?
Yeah. Could you use flour?
And as it dried, it pulled the poison out, see? Okay. So I took this here bag of soap and cream. Of course, I didn't have to make so much because I knew where she was bit. She bit on the udder. And I put it on her. I rubbed it all on her with my hand. I rubbed it all on her good. And then I put this here pack on her, you know, this pack that I had. The next morning, she was up eating.
How do you melt the soap?
Well, just we melted on the stove.
Just on the stove?
Yes, just melted on. You could take any kind of soap, but I had homemade soap. Yeah. And I had lots of homemade soap.
How much cream would you use?
Well, I just used what cream I had. I always used as much as I had. See, I don't know. We always saved some cream to use on the table, you know, and for cooking. And so I just put all of it in, you know.
Could you use flour instead of bran?
I don't know. I never tried. I guess you could use flour. You could use flour instead of bran, but it would be just as good if you, but it takes too much flour. See, too much of that. You can just take and mash your finger till this here nail will be plumb blue. And you could mix up soap and cream, just make it up kind of thick like these ointments they have, you know, and bind it on there. And the next morning your finger will be well and it won't have no blood under there, nothing.
How do you make soap?
Well, I made it with lye. Made it with lye. I took and and hit the grease, and then I used so much lye and stirred it in that grease and water and lye in that grease till it got a kind of a syrup, you know, just looked like a syrup. And then when it set, it got solid, see, then it was like that. I knew just how to stir it, see, and I made it in a big iron pot, you know, like this. And they call that cold soap, but it wasn't cold soap. It was made hot. But you know, some of the women boiled their soap on the stove. I didn't. I just made mine cold. I had that water, but I stirred it in cold. I knew how much lye to put in, and I just stir and stir till that would get syrup in, and I'd let it go.
Did you ever make lye?
Did it what?
Did you ever make lye?
No, I never did, but my grandmother did out of ashes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she made soap. She made soap out of ashes too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she made the soap with the lye of the ashes, but it was soft soap. You couldn't make it hard. You couldn't get it solid.
Yeah.
I could make pretty white soap, you know. And I always made it. I always washed my hair with homemade soap.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about, were there any bootleggers or moonshiners around El Reno?
Oh yes, there was. They made, you know, whiskey with sour milk, but they wasn't allowed to. But they did anyway.
Where'd they hide it out?
They'd have their place around there to hide it out, you know. Back in the hills where I lived, there was plenty of places they could hide it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd make it and sell it with a jug or with a...
Who was the biggest moonshiner over there?
I don't really know. I don't really remember their names, but I know they made it.
Mm-hmm.
And our post office man made wine. He made wine, and he made good wine.
Mm-hmm.
And he raised the grapes and made the wine. He was a Frenchman. He came from France, you know, his people did anyway. And he made good wine.
What was his name?
Schaefer.
Schaefer.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Eugene Schaefer.
How did your parents meet?
Huh?
Where did your parents meet?
Well, we met there. See, my mother and her dad come with my husband's.
Oh, they all came to make the run together.
Came
Okay.
from Iowa with my husband's father and mother. See,
Mm-hmm. When did they get married?
I don't mean my husband. I mean my father.
Yeah. When did they get married?
I couldn't tell you that. Save me, I couldn't tell you.
Mm-hmm.
But they was a 49ers. I don't know. That was their, you know, when they came, I reckon.
Yeah, the 89ers?
89ers.
Yeah.
89ers. Mama went to the parade one time, you know. My mother lived to be old too. She was 86 when she died.
Yeah.
And I'm 88.
Mm-hmm. Did your mother ride side saddle when she made the run?
I don't know if she did or not.
Yeah.
I rode the side saddle, but I don't know whether she did or not.
Mm-hmm.
My dad bought me a nice side saddle. I could ride as fast as a horse could go.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lovely side saddle. It was all soft leather, you know, like this chamois leather, you know, and it stitched all the seat was. It was real pretty, and I kept it. I was just always that my dad gave me my pony, and he gave me my saddle, and he gave me a cow. No, he gave me 2 cows when I got married, and I trekked out to Weatherford to live, and I lived there my life.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about the Indians.
Well, the old rascals,
Are those the Cheyenne
they'd
Indians?
go through Cheyennes. Well, not altogether Cheyennes. There was other tribes.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd come to your house and want something to eat, And you just as well give them something to eat, because if you didn't, they'd do some kind of damage. So we all fed them when they come, but they didn't, they weren't mean or nothing. They just come and want something to eat. They always want something to eat. There's always eating. And they sat on the streets from morning till night in town. You could always see the Indians sitting around on the street, and they had their land. See, the government paid them. They paid them money after they put them in the reservation, and they fed them. They bought people's cattle and fed the Indians. Then they finally got educated too, you know. Some of them got good. They was smart whenever they got an education. They was really smart.
You ever go to Fort Reno?
Huh?
Ever go to Fort Reno?
Yeah, Darlington is where they always gathered at Darlington. That's right at Fort Reno, you know. There's nothing but just Fort Reno. See, they kept their prisoners there when they had war, you know, overseas, and not World War II. They kept their prisoners at Fort Reno.
How big was Darlington?
Huh?
How big was
Well,
Darlington?
it's not big. No, it's just a small town.
Is it still there?
Yeah, I think it is. I ain't seen it lately, but I think it is. It's still there. So is Fort Reno.
Yeah.
They still handle Indian affairs there, you know. They still do. Some of them Indians, you know, still has got the authority with land, you know. And
Tell me about World War One.
well, I don't know a lot about World War One. My husband had typhoid fever in World War One, and he wasn't able to go. He had got typhoid fever real bad, and his brother went, and but he was put in where they got. He wasn't really put in the war. He was put where they got timber out of to make airplanes, you know. That was where he was put. And my son,
Where was that?
Huh?
Where did he work?
Well, he was in Montana then. That was where they put him, in Montana. Because there's timber there, you know.
Did you do any work for the war effort?
No, I never. We sent the boys things, you know, like candy and stuff like that and that, but we didn't, we, you know, had a group that we went, but we didn't do too much. Well, I couldn't because Jess had the, he was sick, and I didn't think he'd live, but he did. He lived.
What's your husband's name?
Jesse. His name is Jesse, Jesse. That's what they called him, and that's what we named my son after him, you know. He died real young. He was only 56 when he died.
What kind of work did he do?
He was just, he done road work, run the big machinery on building the highway through there, and you know, 66. And when they had the Depression, he was boss of the they hired men, you know, the government hired men so they'd have work, and he was boss, and they cut gyprock out of the gyprock caves out there, and ground it up, you know, and sold it for fertilizer.
Was that a WPA project?
Yeah, it's kind of a WPA project, yeah. And he was always doing something, you know, besides farming. He had cattle. We had good cattle. He'd sorted out the bunch till we had a muley herd. You know, we didn't have to dehorn. You see, the white-faced cattle have horns, you know. The old Texas cattle, you know. Well, he'd bred out the horns so they didn't have horns. They didn't have to dehorn them. All he had to do was brand them, you know. It's quite a job taking off them horns.
How did that depression affect you and your family in the 30s?
Well, we just done like the others. We didn't have much, we couldn't buy much to eat. We just had to raise what we could and get by the best we could.
What salary did your husband make?
Huh?
What salary did your husband make
Well,
with the gyprock?
I don't really know what he made on the gyprock business. I didn't keep track. He always give me money to spend, and I didn't pay no attention.
What kind of meals did you cook in the Depression?
Well, I tell you, we cooked. We just principally had to live on beans and potatoes and things like that. Or if we could raise some tomatoes, we had tomatoes, and we had black-eyed peas. We raised them.
Did you can much?
Yes, I canned lots of them. I at one time canned 40 quarts. And we had a dugout that we kept them in, a cellar, you know. And in later years then, I butchered chickens, and he butchered beef, and we had a locker in town to keep them in, you know.
Did you butcher hogs?
Huh?
Did you butcher hogs?
Yes, he butchered a hog.
How did he cure his hams?
Well, they put them in a salt brine, and they kept this salt brine until it would hold an egg, you know, till the egg would float. They'd make salt in it till the egg would float. Then they'd let it cool, see, and then they'd put that meat in that brine and leave it so long until the salt got clear through it, you know. And then I had an organ when I was a girl, and we had an old organ box, and he'd take corn cobs and burn them underneath that box and smoke the meat. See, smoke it. Oh, that was the best meat you ever tasted. And he'd hang the hams and the shoulders. We'd make sausage out of the back, you know, the tenderloin we called it, and canned it in lard. Fried it and canned it in lard. We just cook it till it would get the blood out of it. We didn't cook it hard. We just cook it till the red went out of it, you know. Then we'd pack it in this lard and seal it tight, and it kept. That made us a change.
Yeah. Did you say he used corn cobs to smoke the hams?
Yeah, he used the corn cob.
How does that
He'd set a fire to the corn cobs in the little hole that he had under the share box, and it was a big square box, about as big as that room right there. Only it was, you know, low, and he made a little. Of course, the lid would come off, but then they fastened the lid on. You know, when they wanted to hang, they put iron rods across and hung that meat all in there, and then they'd build this fire. And so to keep the fire going, they'd have to put fire to the corn cobs. You know, dry corn cobs. It makes a good fire, and he'd put them in there and build a fire every day, and then they'd be smoked. And when they got smoked, why, I'd sew them in cloth, old sheets or something, and then we'd put sorghum molasses all over them and hang them we hung them down in the cellar. We didn't have no ice, so all the ice we had to haul from town, made in town, and we hung them up in the cellar, and you could just bring them hams up, and the Lord Almighty, they was good. And the beef, my mother-in-law, she would, this beef like this here, this salted beef, what do they call it? Can't think of it, can't say it. Dried beef.
Yeah. Kind of jerky?
I went upstairs one day after I married, and I said, "Ma, what's that there? What's that stuff hanging upstairs?" We didn't sleep upstairs, we slept in one of the bedrooms. And why, she said, "Goldie, that's dried beef." And she said, "I'll make you some dried beef gravy some of these days if you'll bring down one of them pieces of beef." And she cut that up and put it on and boiled it till it got tender. And then she put milk in it, and she thickened that milk just a little. Not thick like gravy, but just a little. And boy, was that ever good gravy. She called it dried beef. Break it up, cut it up.
As a little girl, what kind of games did you play?
Well, we used to have, as I said, I can't remember the games we played. We played with pitch cards, that kind. But we didn't play pitch. We played games, and we played old book. They called it book. Mm-hmm. And we played a game called Muggins, and we'd just spend hours, playing them. And up there at that other restaurant house too, while they played that same game, I don't know what they called it, but they give each one 7 cards, and then they have to take one off of the deck, and if they can lay it down in a string out here, they put so many around, like ace and deuce and 6.
Kind of like rummy?
Yeah, and then they keep playing, and the one that gets rid of his cards first, he's won, see. Okay. So that's what they played up that other restaurant. I stayed a month up there, and I didn't like it, so I come back here.
Did you ever go to Fort Reno when they had the prisoners there from World War II?
When they had what?
The prisoners from World War II?
No, I didn't. I didn't go to Fort Reno. I've been to Fort Reno to see it, but I never was there.
When was the first time you came to Oklahoma City?
I come in 1974. When I come down here to live.
When is the first time you came here?
Well, I come here one time to have hemorrhoids doctored, and I guess maybe that was the first time. I came on a streetcar down here. My mother come with me, and of course I had to get a hold of some of this here. Some way or somehow I got a hold of that water that they get out of the ground here. And I thought, I just thought I was going to die before I got home. And Mama went to a drugstore there close to the terminal, and I've often thought about that. And she got some laudanum, and she put it on some sugar and gave me, and that stopped the...
What did she get?
Laudanum, and put it on some sugar. She put about 5 drops of it on sugar and give it to me, and that stopped that diarrhea.
What is that?
I don't know yet. I don't know to now what it is, but it was a liquid medicine of some kind.
Do you have any childhood memories of El Reno?
Um,
What did the town look like?
Well, of course, I went to town. We kids took turn of going to town, and uh, well, it looks just about like it does now. Only there's more buildings, of course. It didn't change too much. Only more buildings went in, you know. And now they're building it way out, you know, putting them stores and things out of town, you know. But it was a good town. It was a good town to go. You could always go in the store and get what you wanted. That's why I liked it.
How come your folks left Iowa?
Huh?
How come your folks left Iowa?
Well, I don't know why they left Iowa. I really don't know. I don't know whether they was crowded there or just wanted to go to a new country or what. I really don't know. My father's folks run a saloon in Iowa. And he was raised in a saloon, see? And I don't know. They just see there was an opening of new country, and they decided they'd go like people do, you know. As I told you, my dad was a rambler anyway. He just wanted to be on the go all the time.
Do you have any more stories about the run of '89?
No,
About the land run?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I just know they had a big celebration, and my mother was living, so she dressed up some of her old time clothes and went to some celebration.
Well, I think we have a good interview. Anything else you can? Anything else you want to talk about?
Huh?
Anything else you want to talk about?
I don't know. I can't think of anything else.
How'd you meet your husband?
Well, my mother's sister married a Murphy, see? And he come down to visit them, and I met him one night at a dance. He lived at Weatherford, see, on a ranch. And I met him at the dance, and he wanted to come see me, so he come to see me.
What kind of dances were they?
Oh, square dances, waltzes, and
Where were they held?
one a step, and all
Yeah.
the stuff as that, you know.
Where were the dances held?
They was held in somebody's house. You know,
So it wasn't
somebody
a-
had a dance,
Yeah.
you know.
So it wasn't like a big barn dance.
One time we had a dance at our house, and there was so doggone many people there that they just didn't have room to dance. And I said, Dad, I don't want you to get drunk tonight. I want you to stay sober, and I want you to keep the crowd in line. I knew there'd be a drink, and they always drank. And he said, all right, daughter. He always called me daughter. And he stayed sober. He didn't drink. He stayed, and he broke up 2 or 3 fights, you know, such things as that. There was just so doggone many people there they couldn't dance, you know.
Who played for the dances?
My father played the violin, and I used to second for him on the organ, you know.
You did?
Uh-huh. We'd play for dances, you know, and we'd have others. There'd be others play a guitar or something like that, you know.
What kind of music would you play?
Oh, it's the old-fashioned kind. like well, you don't hear it anymore.
What are the names of some of the songs?
Well, let's see, I don't know, really, I don't remember the names of the, oh, they was, I can't think of them.
Do you still play?
He played schottisches and he played two steps, you know, them kind of music.
Do you still play?
Huh?
Do you still play the organ?
I can't play anymore. I just said I could play an organ, but I can't play these new kind. I had an old-fashioned organ. He bought me a 6-octave old-fashioned organ that could pop for your feet, you know. I could play.
Can you play one of those?
Well, I could if I'd get a chance, but they don't make them anymore.
Well, if I find one, you want to play it?
You want to play it? I don't know.
I got one.
I don't know. I ain't played in it for years. I sold mine for $100 and went on a trip to California. And the kids took me. They was working and they took me. And I still had my side saddle, and I sold it for $45. And you know, I could have got $200 now for that.
That's right. What's the date today?
16.
And the man that bought it, he bought antiques to sell to California, you know. But
Okay. Okay, this is March 16th, 1984. Joe Todd, this has been an interview with
yeah,
Goldie Murphy. Good. That's supposed to go in the front.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. Medicine was quinine. Quinine. I get the flu and I don't get better unless I take quinine. Quinine will circulate your blood. I went up here at this hospital and I nearly had a stroke in my leg. And I said, you call that doctor and tell him I want something for my leg. I'm going to have a stroke in it. She said, she went and called the doctor and she come back and she said, Mrs. Murphy, they're giving you all they know to give you. Well, I said, tell them to get me some quinine. Oh, she said, I don't think you can get it. Well, I said, it's a darn funny drugstore if you can't get quinine. And so then she sat down, she said, Miss Murphy, what do you take when you have poor circulation? I said, I take 2 swallows of raw whiskey, if I can get it. And if I can't, I always keep quinine, and if I can get hold of a quinine, I take quinine. Take a capsule of 3-grain quinine. And she said, well, maybe we can get you oh, that's all right.
No.
It's holding something. He said, maybe we can get you a bottle of beer. Will that do it? I said, I don't know. I never took beer for to start circulation, but it's got a power of circulating, you know what I mean. Beer is like whiskey in a way. It's made out of corn and stuff. And I said, I'll try a can of it. And I had her get me a pan of hot water and I put my feet in it. And I kept rubbing that leg. And so they tried all over the hospital to get me a can of beer. You know, usually the colored people have it, but they didn't have any. So one of them, I know it was a colored man, he said, I've got some at home, I'll go home, and it was night, in the night. I don't know just what time it was, but it was late in the night. He said, I'll go home and get a can of beer. So I drank that beer, and it got the circulation started, and my leg got better then. But it just didn't have a bit of feeling in it. I could just touch it this way, and it was just like a block. And I said, I'm going to have a stroke if you don't give me something to circulate my blood. So they did. They got me the beer, and they got that. So then she said, now don't come back to the hospital without some whiskey or some or some quinine. She said. I said, well, all right, I won't. I said, I keep it at home.
Grandma, we're gonna have to go.
I know
Joe has to make another appointment.
Oh, does he?